Hey everyone, buckle up because today's deep dive is going to be a fun one. We're hitting the road
You.
to explore the cost of charging up electric vehicles
Okay.
across Europe.
I'm so
All
there.
right, so we're plugging into this really cool chart by Visual Capitalist.
Hmm.
It's based on data from the European Alternative Fuels Observatory,
Yeah.
the EAFO, and they've
Ugh.
pulled together all this data from 2024.
Nice.
And it's really fascinating stuff, but
Yeah.
we're not just going to list off prices or anything. We're going to
No.
try to figure out what's behind these numbers.
Absolutely. Like, what's the story
What's the story? Yeah.
behind those euro signs, right?
Yeah,
What's
exactly.
making those numbers tick up or down?
Exactly. And what it all means for, the future of EVs over in Europe.
For sure.
So imagine you and me, we're cruising in our fancy new EV,
Yeah.
top down the open road ahead of us.
Right.
And then that dreaded low battery alert pops up. Right. Time for a recharge.
Got to juice up.
But how much is that pit stop going to cost us?
Yeah, that's the question, isn't it? And it can really vary.
Okay. I'm ready for some numbers. Hit me.
All right, so let's talk fast charging. Okay, we're talking that quick 25-minute boost for a Tesla Model 3 at a public charging station.
Okay, a typical pit stop.
Exactly. So picture yourself in Iceland for a second. You pull up to the charging station, and guess what? A fast charge there will only set you back a measly 2.9 euros.
2.9 euros? Are you serious?
I'm telling you,
Yeah.
that's less than a cappuccino in some places.
Iceland, you are speaking my language. Cheap and sustainable. I'm sold. But let's be real, not every country is giving away EV charges like it's a sale at the duty-free shop. What's the other end of the spectrum look like?
All right, well, on the flip side, you've got Norway, stunning country, amazing EV adoption rates, but hold on to your hats because that same 25-minute charge is going to cost you a whopping 18.9.
18.9 euros. Okay, that's a pretty significant difference. Talk about sticker shock. But before we write off Norway entirely, let's remember that this data represents the extremes.
Exactly. We're talking about the outliers here. For a big chunk of Europe, you're looking at a more manageable 5 to 10 euro per 100 kilometers.
Okay, that makes me feel a little better. But you know me, I always want to know the why. Why such a big difference between Iceland, where it's practically a reward to charge your car, and Norway, where it feels like you need to refinance your house for a quick jolt of electricity?
Right, right. Well, Iceland is basically like a renewable energy paradise, right? Think geothermal and hydroelectric power galore.
Yeah, they've got those volcanoes working overtime.
Exactly. And all that abundance translates into some seriously low electricity prices. So cheaper electricity equals cheaper charging. It's kind of a no-brainer.
Okay, that makes sense. So is Norway lacking those renewable resources? Is that why their prices are so high?
It's not that simple, unfortunately. While Norway does get a good chunk of its electricity from hydropower, their overall energy prices are about 25% higher than the EU average.
25% higher. What's driving those prices up so much?
Well, you've got taxes on electricity consumption, grid maintenance costs, and even government policies aimed at promoting energy efficiency. It all adds up.
So it's more like a complex recipe than a single ingredient, huh? This reminds me of something we were talking about earlier. It seems like renewable energy plays a big role here. Is that a trend across the board?
You've hit the nail on the head. Generally speaking, countries with a larger share of renewable energy in their mix tend to have lower EV charging costs. Take Portugal, for instance. They've been making huge strides in wind power, and their EV charging costs are pretty attractive. Same story with Finland and their investment in bioenergy. It's a win-win, cheaper and greener.
Okay, so maybe I'll skip Germany for my next EV road trip since they still rely heavily on those pricey energy imports, or...
You might want to consider that. But of course, it's never quite as simple as saying renewable is always good and non-renewable is always bad. Each country has its own energy mix and unique challenges, right? This data really highlights that if we want EVs to be a real option for everyone, not just the wealthy, we've got to make that push for affordable and renewable energy. Speaking of which, that brings us to our next point.
This is reminding me that there's a much bigger picture here than just the cost of charging, right?
Absolutely.
It's about electric vehicles becoming mainstream, taking over the roads, at least in Europe. Isn't that the whole idea?
You got it. And when it comes to taking over roads, Norway's the perfect example.
Oh, for sure. They're like the superstars of EV adoption.
It's incredible.
Didn't they say something like 80% of new cars sold there last year were electric?
2023, it was a whopping 80%.
That's not just a trend, that's a total transformation.
And it just goes to show you that high prices don't always mean slow adoption.
That's true. But why? Why is Norway like this?
They invested heavily in charging infrastructure early on. I mean, what good's a cheap charge if you can't find a place to plug in, right?
Right, of course, that makes total sense.
Now you've got 80% of drivers in Norway. They're not worried about finding a charging station when they need one. They've got options.
So they took that initial hit, the higher cost, to build up a system that could actually support a ton of EVs.
Exactly. They play the long game, and it's paying off big time. And here's the interesting thing for the rest of Europe.
What's that?
They're in a really good position to follow suit. I mean, they've got the resources, they've got the infrastructure, and more people are aware of EVs now. It's the perfect recipe for making EVs the new normal.
They could be leading a whole new wave of transportation.
And if Europe gets it right, the rest of the world, they'll be watching and learning.
Totally. Imagine a future where all of Europe is like this giant interconnected network of EV charging stations.
Oh, it'd be huge.
Travel would change completely, tourism, the environment, everything.
The possibilities are pretty exciting when you think about it.
Speaking of possibilities, let's go back to Norway for a second. Their journey with electric vehicles is kind of amazing, don't you think? They went from almost nothing, like 3% adoption back in 2012, to almost 90% now in 2024.
It's a testament to what's possible with the right policies and investment. Plus, you need people to be on board.
Yeah, public enthusiasm is huge. It gives me hope that we can actually tackle this whole climate change thing, even if it's one electric vehicle at a time.
Me too. And it highlights something important about this data we've been looking at. This is just a snapshot in time, right?
Okay.
These charging costs, they're fascinating, but they're going to change as more people switch to EVs, as technology develops. It's a moving target.
So are we saying there's a future where charging your car in, say, Lisbon is as affordable as it is in Reykjavik? So are we saying there's a future where charging your car in, say, Lisbon is as affordable as it is in Reykjavik?
I think it's definitely possible. Yeah. As more countries embrace renewable energy and electricity costs go down, we could see charging costs across Europe start to even out.
Okay, now that's a future I'd love to see. Imagine. No more range anxiety because no matter where you are, the price to charge is basically the same.
It'd be amazing, wouldn't it?
Well, yeah.
It just shows how connected everything is. Energy, infrastructure, transportation, they all play a part in making a greener future. But it's not going to be as easy as just, flipping a switch.
Right. There's always a catch. So what else do we need to consider?
Government policies are a big one. They can really make or break EV adoption, and that includes the cost of charging. We're talking tax breaks for EV owners, subsidies for renewable energy, even how they manage the electricity grid. It all makes a difference.
So it's not enough to just build charging stations and put solar panels everywhere. We need a whole system that makes sustainable transportation affordable.
Exactly. It's a complex puzzle, and each country is going to find its own way to solve it. That's what makes this whole EV revolution so fascinating to watch. We're seeing a complete change in how we think about cars, energy, even our cities.
It's like hitting the reset button on a 100-year-old industry. All right, before we wrap up this electrifying deep dive, let's recap what we've learned. We've covered a lot of ground.
Yeah, we have.
We took a road trip across Europe exploring EV charging costs. We saw how much they can vary, from super cheap in Iceland to, ouch, pretty pricey in Norway.
We dug into why those prices are so different, and it turns out renewable energy is key to keeping costs down. Plus, we can't forget about government policies and those energy imports.
And then we zoomed out to the bigger picture. Europe, with all its resources and infrastructure, it's in a prime position to lead the way in making EVs the new normal. That could mean a cleaner, more sustainable future for everyone.
For sure.
As we unplug from this electrifying conversation, we'll leave you with one last thought. We've seen how quickly things can change in the EV world, right? Think back to Norway's journey. As more countries go green and invest in charging, will those charging costs across Europe eventually become more similar? Will it be a level playing field for EV drivers, or will we still see those price differences, making some places more affordable than others? It's something to keep an eye on.
Absolutely. It'll be really interesting to see how things play out.
Thanks for joining us on this electrifying journey through the world of EV charging costs in Europe. Until next time, keep those wheels turning and those minds curious.